Okay, so let me introduce myself first. I'm Viktoria Polupan. I'm working last 4 years for Smart IT as a UX developer, and recently we started working with Dynamics 365, which is quite different from what we had previously with AX 2012. And today I'll try to tell you about my five findings. They are not really complicated or not something that you will not able to find on the Google or on the Microsoft Wiki, but this is with that I faced during my first development project and in Dynamics 365, and this is 5 things in development that I want to take you through, and maybe in the future it will save a little bit of your time, and you will know the way how to resolve such situation. So today I will tell you about 5 main things in AX development. The first part will be how we can implement the factory pattern, design pattern, which is well known from the object-oriented programming, and especially how to implement it in Dynamics 365 to make sure that next developers who will try to consume your code to extend it will not face with the problem of overlaying. Also, we will investigate the topic how we can build dynamic ranges in Dynamics 365 using SysQueryRangeUtil class and framework. We will talk how we can consume no public variables and methods when we are doing the class extensions. And also, we will speak about how we can work with Json format, how we can serialize it, deserialize. As you all probably know that in Dynamics 365, Microsoft released ability to work with REST services. And also, I want to tell you about form adapters classes. This is new type of objects, like a new feature that Microsoft introduced in current release. This is kind of a wrapper of the forms that you can use to emulate some user actions from the code. So the first part will be related to factory design pattern. So you probably already heard about it or even use it. This is the type of creation pattern. Why I selected such a word picture? Because it's quite funny, and I think it can illustrate the sense of this design pattern. So this guy, he is a client. He is a client, for example, of some cafe, and he doesn't know what he definitely wants to have. But he knows that he wants just something sweet, and probably he wants something with chocolate. And that's why he is not going to tell that I want to order this ice cream or this ice cream. He will just call the waiter and will say, I want something sweet and I want this sweet with chocolate. And then the waiter or the factory, like on the screen, will decide what type of dish, what type of ice cream they will deliver to him. And same situation you have when you are going to use the factory pattern. It's the situation when you want to create some instance of an object that will satisfy your needs, that will have some behavior that you expected, but you're not going to tell to the system that I want to create especially this type of object. You will send some parameters, some criteria to decide to the, for example, construct class, and then based on this input parameter, system will return you correct type of an instance. I will show you an example how it's currently implemented in AX7, for example. I think the most famous example, all developers who work with AX, they know the sales format framework that can help you to post and process different type of sales documents like invoice or packing slip and some more. And on the sales format class, so a sales formatter, it's kind of abstract class, maybe not definitely abstract, I can't remember for now, but this is kind of the template class that will describe the common behavior, how how to. Okay, so it will describe the source remote class. This is like a template that will describe the common behavior when you are going to post any type of the sales-based document, like invoice and packet slip, as I said previously. And this sales from letter class, it has a set of child classes. For example, the sales invoice underscore delivery slip or free text or invoice, and each specific child of this parent class, sales from letter, will describe what should be the behavior when we are trying to post this specific document. So if we will open this class, we will be able to find construct method. Sorry, it's a bit different in X7 and I can't get used to it at all. Oh, okay, this is the one. Yeah, so you see that this construct method, this is the implementation of factory framework. So to this method, you are passing some information about what type of document you are going to post, what class and method name are you going to use. And also depends on it, this method can make decision and return you the correct instance of the child class. But probably people who already did some development in Dynamics 365 and AX, you know that currently we can't change the standard class that simple. So the standard class belongs now to some standard model, and to follow best practice approach in development, you need to do not do any varying, changes on the standard model, but try to extend the objects. So you can't that simple. If you would want to create a new child of the sales from meta class, and you need to somehow to make sure that this factory pattern will also able to handle the creation of your new type of document, you in AX 2012 you would just simple add a new line to this construct method, and thus you will make sure when the required parameter will reach this class, you will get the references to your new child. But in AX7, as I said, it's not that simple. You can't just simply add a line to this place, because you will need to overlay the standard object, and in the future you might have some problems during the upgrade or like different processes. So how it can be resolved in AX7? It should be resolved not on the stage when we are trying to extend our framework and to add a new child. It should be resolved at the moment when we are trying to build new structure of the classes. So, for example, in this example, we have just the ordinary abstract class with the name document display. There will be some, for example, class which will have some, again, some methods and variables to implement some common behavior for a few types of documents. And this class will be abstract. We will not able to create any real object based on this class, but we will add to this class, instead of construct method, different one, a get instance, which will be also return the references to the new object. Similar way as with construct method, we will pass some parameter to identify what type of child we want to get back from this method. And as you can see on this get instance method, instead of simply enumerating all the all the possible child references to them, we will use the sys plugin metadata collection. How does it work? For example, to the sys plugin metadata collection, we will add the pairs, some criteria, parameter, and value. And when on the next stage we will try to create a new child of this class, for example, document to play underscore invoice, we will, as the first point, say that our new child class will extend the parent class, and also we will add few new attributes. The first attribute will say that this child will have this value invoice for this criteria operation. And also, this class will be the child of the parent class document template. And on the document template class, when we are creating this plugin metadata collection and passing the input parameters operation, system will go through all the classes which they extend the current parent class, and they have defined attribute operation and some value, and it will select the correct instance of the child class based on the specified attribute value. So instead of simply enumerating in the code all the possible variants, we're putting the references to some attribute and to the value, and the child class we will decorate from the header, from the class decoration, we will decorate with this attribute value. Thus, even you are done with your development and you deliver this solution to your customer, and customer will want to extend it and, for example, create a new instance of the class, for example, document template credit note. He will not need to modify the construct of the parent class to make sure that the factory design pattern will work in this case. He will just simply need to create new child of the class and specify the required attributes. And that's it really. So you can avoid overlaying in this way. And
question, the next question.
Question will be on the question section, or we can.
You can ask now if you want.
If I can't throw to this function a static value, if I want to throw a function value or calculate value, you see?
Yeah, I see what you mean. So you mean in runtime you don't know what? Yeah, I think maybe your question will be answered based on this example that I built on the job. So this is a small job to demonstrate the behavior. How does it work? For example, this is the parent class that we see, and this is the get instance that previously was a construct. And the only thing that we are doing to create the correct the object of the correct instance that we wanted, the object of the correct child, we are passing the some input parameters. So, for example, if I want to create an instance of a voice, I will pass to the get instance method the parameter that will identify that I want to create in voice. I mean, based on the attributes defined on the class level. And we can check it based on it. System, I mean, in this example, we are referring just to the parent class, but system will create for us a child, and in this case, will call the get description method not from the parent class as we are calling it now, but from the required child. So in this example, it will call the get description method from the invoice. Again, yeah.
Do we have on Salesman ledger class one method get instance?
No, we don't, because it's still implementing without the plugins. I mean, this approach, when you're trying to implement the factory using attributes, it's called plugin, and it's still self-formatted class. It still use the old approach when you have just simply.
If
Yeah.
you want to extend self-formatted, we still should use overlaying. Yeah.
You should do overlaying, or there is one way you can try to subscribe the construct method of the self-formatter class within the pre-handler method, but you need to make sure that that if on the pre-handler method your new instance of the class will be created, then system will not go and will not execute the main part of the construct after that.
Can I use not one label?
I think yes, because if you will take a look on this document template class, you can see that this is sysplugin factory. This is a collection. So to collection, you can use not just one single pair of attribute and value. You can send to this collection, I think, so many attributes as you need. I'm not sure about limitation, what's the maximum number of attributes that you can pass, but I believe you can specify more parameters. You just will need to, specify additional attributes on your child classes declaration. And in this case, this is the value from enumeration, but it can be anything. It can be some string constant or maybe some integer parameter. Yeah, so again, let's go back to the example. So we see that this is the first child, credit node, and on this credit node child, we have the get description method that will be returned credit node. And on the invoice class, we have like the same method, but instead it will be returning the description of current class, which is invoice. And if we will go back to this example, to this job, again, we will see that we are just simply calling. We don't know. We know that we want to create the class that will post the invoice. But as a developer, for example, I don't want to know which exactly class I need to use. I want just to say I want to create invoice, and I want the system will select the required class instead of me. So if we will try to trace this example. Let's try a little bit because this is like 7. Yeah, so if we will try to trace this example, we can see that the first variable, the first enumeration variable named class1 has a description of the invoice class. So in runtime, system received the invoice parameter. It went through in a loop through all the child of the document template class, and based on the attribute value, it selected the correct instance, and it called the get description method of the required child. And same it did in the second example again, but in this case it's called the get description method of the credit node. Yeah, so it's simple trick, but if you will try to in Dynamics 365, you will try to develop your structure of the class like this, then you can make the life not so complicated for the people who will work with your code later, especially if you're working for the partner and you are going to deliver some like vendor solution ASV or something like that. I think this is all about the factory implementation in Dynamics 365. We can move on to the next chapter if maybe you have some question about this. Okay. Okay, so the next one, I think it will be, the next one, I think it will be not so complicated to understand for people who are not developers. I think I should start from, we will try to speak about dynamic ranges in AX 2012 and Dynamics 365. On the first point, let's imagine that we have such a situation when you need to build interface to export your data to some external system. And for example, you want AX is a master system which holds all the products and, for example, all the product translation if you are going to sell them in different countries. And for example, you need to export the product with translation, but you want to pass to the external system just the product translation in the name of the company in AX. So sure, you can build a query and place a static range to always export just translation for example, English. But what if your query will be then used by the company in Japan, for example, and they will want to receive translation in Japanese? For such situation, you can use dynamic ranges in Dynamics AX, even from Dynamics AX 2012. How it looks previously, how it used previously in AX12, you have this system class SysQueryRangeUtil, and you can. This is a class which holds the set of static methods. For example, current company. It's just a static method which is always returning the name of the current company, or for example, the current date or current language, and some more. And when you build the query, instead of putting some constant value to the range of the query, you can to the value put things like this, just to mention the name of the method, and then you can make sure that during the runtime, that for this range system will not use the static value. On the stage of query execution, it will always try to run this get, for example, agreement dimension attribute method first, or maybe the current date method in runtime will check what's the current date or what's the agreement dimension attribute current in this company for this AX, and then put this value to the range. So problem in general is common. So again, and in AX 2012, you only had one way to resolve this. If you are not happy with all the standard methods that you have, the only thing you could do, you could create your own new method like this, get agreement dimension attribute, and put this method to the standard class. And then on the query, just define just the name of the class without saying from what class system should take it from. I mean, system always can take it just from this SysQueryRangeUtil. But situation again changed in Dynamics 365. Again, if we want to create our new custom dynamic range, for example, on the set of class, you have the method that can return the current language ID. This method is the language of the session. But what if you, for example, need to export translation for the company language? Then you need to create a new static method to build a new dynamic range. And again, in Dynamics 365, if you are going to add a new method to this standard class, you will do is as overlayering. And to follow the best practices, we want sure to avoid overlayering, and we want to find a way how to do this using extensions. So it's quite easy in AX7. What generally you need to do, again, I will show you an example. Now you can use any class you want, even your new custom, but the only thing you need to do, you need to decorate your static method, which will return your new dynamic range with this query range function attribute. And again, if we will try to use this range on the query, if we will open the query example, in AX2012, we just had to mention the method name. Because in AX7 we can do it in any class we want, but the method should contain the required attribute, we also need to specify the class name and the method name. And on this query, this is a simple query, a standard query series order table, which should return us the list of all possible sales orders on the system. We created an extension, and to this extension of the query I placed the range, and this range should take the value from the my class. My class, what my class will do, it contains just one dynamic range that will check the sales parameters. On the sales parameters, it will take the default type of the sales order, and during the runtime, it always will check the setting and return the default type. Thus, let's imagine the situation. We have external system to what we need to pass the list of the sales orders, but we need to this extraction scope, we need to exclude just the sales orders that they have the default type. And again, default type on the parameters, they can simply change from the user interface. We can change the setting anytime we want, and we want to keep our outbound interface generic. So how the system will work? If you will try to use this query in the outbound interface, the query structure is static, but the range value is not. It's dynamic, and system will build the query, and then we'll calculate what should be the returning value from this method. For example, it will be standard sales type, can be like a sales order or the journal or some more. And just at the moment when this query will be executed, the value from parameter will be applied as a value for this range. So you can have some like generic cases. But in this way, you can build just ranges that they are not dependent on the query data, like the range that you can describe via the static method. Yeah, and also when I did example, so one more time, it's just any class, but your method should be decorated with this attribute. And via this attribute system, we're able to find that this is one of the possible dynamic ranges. So when I did development, at the first point, I was thinking that those dynamic ranges functionality, they're quite useful just in case when you have a static query, because when you are building the query from the code, you can specify and in runtime get any value you want. But then I realized it's not like that. I saw the implementation when some of the interfaces, they build the query in code, dynamic query, which is not on the IoT, which is not IoT object. Then this query structure or query run structure will be stored to the, for example, will be saved to some blob to the database, and then after some time, this query was taken from the table and was executed. So, for example, again, if you are building the query from the code, and you will calculate the value that you want to apply to the range, you can do it, but if you will have some delay between the moment when you build the query and execute it, you can have a difference. Somebody can change the setting in this delay, in periods between the building the query and execution. I think this is all about this part. This is again simple but quite useful, especially when you're working within the integration. So maybe somebody has a question about it. No question at all. I'm telling so bad. So. Just in case, we'll check the Skype. Okay. Okay, then let's go to the next part. Okay, the second part will be how we can consume no public variables. Again, some of the things in Dynamics 365 in development, they made our life not so complicated, but some of them, they made our life terrible. Because with this, extension concept, from one point, we are trying to make our code independent from the standards, independent from the code from third-party solution, but from the other hand, we need to think how we can do implementation that we could simply resolve in previous version. Again, I will give you a small case, small example, just that you can realize the problem. So, for example, we have a sales table form class. This is standard X class that can help you to control the sales table form. It can depends on, for example, on the data that you're trying to see on the form. It can disable or enable some of the fields for editing. It can hide or display on opposite some grid, some data. It can control the behavior of the sales table form as you need. Depends on data that you are trying to see, and depends on the IX settings. But what if, and again, this sales table form is a standard, and it belongs to the standard model that we can't customize so easy. So we need somehow to understand how we can extend this sales table form class if we want to bring to the standard logic some new functionality from our project. And from one hand, Microsoft is giving us a new opportunity. We can create an extension of the standard class and put all new logic and all new methods that we want to this extension. And thus we will avoid overlayering. But from the other hand, we have OLP concept in X++ that we need to follow. And if we will try to create extension of the standard class, in this extension, in the code of extension, we will be able just to access the public methods and variables. If we have variables or methods with private or protected identifier, then we will not able to use them in the in our implementation. So, for example, to the sales table, I added new field. Just using extension, and this field I want to control it, for example, allow or blocked editing ability depends on the settings, and to implement this requirement based on the best practices, again I need to extend sales table form class and avoid overlayering. But to be able to disable or enable editing for my control, which is placed on the sales order data source, I need somehow to access sales table data source. And if we will open the sales table form class, and we will check the declaration, we'll try to find the sales table data source. Wait this 1 second. Yeah, this is the one. So we can see that on the sales table data source, we doesn't have any public identifier. It means that by default it will be protected. So again, we want to use it, but we can't reach it on the extension. And what we should do in such a situation, if we want to use it, but we can't access it in extension. In .NET framework, we had, not just in .NET, but in other programming languages, we have such a meaning reflection. Reflection is the ability of computer program to examine, introspect, and modify its own structure in the behavior of runtime. I can just, maybe people who they are doing development in .NET, they understand what's this, but for IX developer, I can explain in such a way. For example, you have such a requirement where you need to call some method, but you will know the name of the method just during the runtime. So you can't define clearly on the code that in this method I want to call this functionality. You will know what method you will need to call just during the runtime, during the execution. And in this case, you need reflection. But in some of the high-level languages, which has the object-oriented approach, sometimes you need to also to somehow ignore the rules that you have from the security modifiers. Like you need to access the variables, the private variables, and in this reflection. So how we can do it in case of X++ development? So again, I will demonstrate to you. If I will try to comment it out my code, which I built, can't remember how to do it, I think this one. And if I will just, again, this class the extension of the sales table form, and what I want to do, I want just as simply as possible call the disable editable of my new parameter on the sales table data source. But if I will try to access this sales table data source variable, I will have a compilation error. See, I even don't have IntelliSense anything because this variable is not accessible. 1 second, we will check it. Just to demonstrate that it is really like this. So see, the variable it's underlined in red color. It does mean that system can't recognize what's this variable and where it's from, and it's just because it's not public. And 1 second. And in this case, we can use the reflection. How we can use the reflection? We can just like force system to bring to our code the variable and its value, even it's not public. So you can see the implementation, how we can do it. We just define in the bind flag that we want to have the instance of the non-public variable, and we should also know what should be the variable name, the private or protected variable name, or the private or protected method that we want to call. And in such an implementation, we can get the references to this variable from our current class. In this case, our sales table form class will be in pointer this because we extended the standard class. And with such a string, we can get the value of the data source, the references to the data source, which is protected and we can't access it in different way. And after that, we can we are free to use this data source variable and do any actions we would like. And then we want to set it back to our extended class and use this updated data source on the form. And we can check that it does work. Let's compile it first to see that now the sales table is available, and we can run it and make sure that it does work. The complicated thing in Dynamics 365 and especially in Visual Studio, in previous version, if you had like some view or table, you can synchronize the view or table or any data type just right-clicking on the object and calling the synchronize. In Visual Studio, you can't synchronize object independently. You just need to run synchronization for the whole project or do the full model or few models build and synchronization. That's why the process of the build can take so long. So sorry, we need to wait. Okay, so let's check this example. This is quite simple code. Again, within the reflection, we will get the pointer to the form data source sales table. Then on the TMS parameters, we have some criteria. If carrier integration is enabled or not. We're taking the value of this parameter, and based on this parameter activation, we are making decision. If the parameter is active, then we want to make our new field uneditable. Otherwise, we can edit it free. And from the last line, we are setting these references to the updated data source to the extended object. Okay, so on the first point, let's go to the transportation management. You need to refresh it because you rebuild the project. And on the transportation parameters, so let's check the parameter value. From that, we have a dependency. This parameter is currently off. Let's switch it on. And now we want to go back to the sales order form and see if the fact that we activate the carrier integration will block the control from the editing. Let's open any sales order and navigate to the header. delivery, and this is the one. This is the external mode of delivery that we added, and even we will add the grid, open the form in edit view, that the rest of the controls, they are editable, we are free to edit them, and just only external mode of delivery that we blocked, it's blocked from editing. So this is how it works, and how you can like in some way break the modifiers limitation and use the no public variables in methods. It's good that you can avoid doing overlayering when you have such a situation, but from the other hand, it have a set of like bunch of minuses. This reflection property it's giving to your solution some flexibility, but from the other hand, it's really slow, and even Microsoft saying about it. And also, apart from that, you never know. I mean, because this code is dynamic, you never know if your code is going to work or not before you will execute it, because you, in this case, for example, trying to access a variable just by its name. And what if you subscribe the standard code, you paste your code, you use the variable, and then you receive a new update from Microsoft. And for example, Microsoft even don't thinking about you could implement such a thing. They changed, for example, the variable name or the method name, or they rebuild the class completely. Then in such way, when you recompile the project, you will not see any compilation errors, as you would see if, in case you would use the real code avoiding reflection. But you will have issues during the runtime, because the system will not able to identify the variable or the name with such a name during execution. So in case you are not doing regression testing, you can have problems not on the stage when you are merging or when you are doing the upgrade, but on QA system, or even worse, on the production system. So this is why I think 95% of the situation you can handle without this. And if you still can't handle anything, your implementation without overlaying, it's better to think one more time and decide if you want to use the reflection.
One additional thing. Microsoft creates statistic for overlaying objects. And in this case, if you use this approach, Microsoft has no knowledge about this variable and not modify this code in future.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Just to summarize what Vitaly said, he's saying that Microsoft, the current release of Dynamics 365 that we have, it's more or less stable, but still Microsoft is still calculating some statistics, some information from their customers. And when you're doing development and like, for example, uploading the packages to LCS, they can build some statistic and they can see what are the what are the places where you can't extend something and you need to overlay things. So what Vitaly is meant what Vitaly meant, he's saying that in case you are avoiding overlaying and using such approach, Microsoft can't identify this place as a problem. And in the future version, they are not going to fix it. Correct? Okay, maybe somebody has some question. Again, you, okay.
If we use reflection on the same field and on the different classes, how it will work?
What do you mean? Not sure.
I mean view.
Okay. So you mean what if we are not extending the current class, but we want to get the instance of different class? It will work, but it's very bad. You should be punished for that, because in this case, you at least have a good reason to do it. It's quite risky, you can have runtime errors, but you don't have a choice, you want to avoid overlaying. But in case you're going to use it with different class, you don't have a reason for that. So it's a risk that you can't take. You can do it, it will work, but you shouldn't do it. Okay? Should we move on, or maybe more question? No? No? Okay. Just in case, we'll check Skype. Nothing? Okay, let's move on. This is my favorite part. With that I struggle, and that realized the solution was obvious. Not the one again, oh my god. Okay, so JSON. If you were working with AX previously, you probably would use XML as the main format when you were trying to pass the data and receive the data from external system. But in last release, in the next 365, Microsoft introduced the ability to work with the REST services. And one of the benefits, how we can, what they released, the new benefit is that apart from using XML, you now can use JSON format. And why JSON format is better? Because this is standard, this is web standard, it's light comparing to XML, and it should work quicker, and it's not so strongly typed. It's strongly typed format, but it's not so complicated as XML. So because we didn't work with JSON, or we did work, but not so often as we should work now, we don't have a good way how to build it from IX and how to deserialize it, how to read it. When we were speaking about XML, each developer probably know that you have a bunch of standard classes like XML writer, XML reader to read XML and to build it. And when we're talking about JSON, we know nothing. At least I didn't know anything. How to use it, how to serialize object to JSON, and how to serialize it back from JSON to data construct object. And when I started implementation, from the first point, I was thinking, okay, so there should be some external library that I can use. And there were some external libraries, and even the library that was included to the .NET framework. So there were a couple main that Microsoft used on the GitHub projects when they were trying to consume REST services. From AX, on the samples, they were using some JSON serialization library, which is a part of .NET framework, and they also used Newtonsoft library, which is not a part of .NET framework, but you can load it to your Visual Studio using NuGet Manager. And why I had problems with JSON serialization and deserialization? Because when I was trying to use .NET libraries to implement this requirement, some of the structures, some of the data types, they are different in AX and in .NET. For example, if we will try to explore the list structure, in .NET list can be generic. So this is like a list where each element of the list can be some object, and we can define what will be the type of object during the runtime. Or this can be the list with a fixed format. So at the moment when we are trying to create the list, we already know what type of object will be placed on each list component. And in AX it's quite different. When we are creating the list, we can define what type will be the component. It will be some primitive type, or it will be object, but we don't know before initialization of the list what definitely will be the object that we want to create on each place of the list. So, for example, when I was trying to do deserialization using .NET external library, I couldn't do that because the data types, they were different. I struggle because on the same data contract, I have different formats. I have different JSON string and some more. And then I realized that if we have ability to build custom service in AX, when we are sending some JSON and system can generate and send us back response, that it means that inside AX, inside the kernel or inside some like application code, there is already mechanism to serialize, deserialize JSON strings, and they probably do it in correct way because the whole team, the whole Microsoft was working on it, and I just was trying to search through the application objects and was trying to find maybe there is already some implementation in AX, some maybe AX standard class that can resolve my problem. And I found it. inside, it's again using some .NET components to satisfy this requirement. But again, Microsoft, they did develop some wrapper some time ago. They decorated .NET libraries within the proper X++ code, and when we need to serialize or deserialize some structures, some objects from X++, Microsoft already did it instead of us. They did all the casting from X++ to .NET and back. So I just want to show you the example of this class. So it means that we don't need to include any external component. We don't need to include any references. We can just take prepared solution from Microsoft and use it. So the class name that you can use to, again, to avoid using external components, form JSON serializer. And if this is standard class, it should be, it's even available on the update 2, update 1 of Dynamics 365. And if we will take inside this class, that we can see that again, this is X class which Microsoft built. This is wrapper, and inside they're using Util soft, which is external .NET component to do all the serialization. But what is good in this, they implemented all this X++ logic to do a casting. And now if we need, for example, to serialize the list from X++, we can simply do it, calling just one method instead of doing lots of castings. So later, I mean, if you will use it, you can check this class to check all the details, how they did it and why they did it. And I just want on the job to demonstrate how does it work and how we can use it without any additional issues. So for example, in this job, I defined a few structures, one list, one array, and one object. And this object is the data construct object. It has if I'm not mistaken, a couple of the variables and corresponding parameters. And for example, I just simply want to fill 3 of them to create 3 instances, and each instance I will add to the list and to the array. And again, if we have data construct or list or arrays of data constructs, and we want to get the JSON string that in the future we want to send it to the REST service, we can do it simply within one line of code, like this. So what's the trick inside the serialize class? Inside the methods, Microsoft already implemented the logic to identify the type of your object, if this is just a simple object, or this is the list of objects, or this is array, and it will call, the method itself is generic, and inside it will call the corresponding method that can correctly serialize your instance.
When we use XML approach, in case we run our services using custom service, for example, we should sort our attributes, XML tags, in alphabet order. In case we use JSON, should we sort our attributes in alphabet order?
I think the requirement that you should sort attributes in the alphabet orders, you mean nodes, not attributes, right? The nodes of XML.
Just only name of X.
Yeah, nodes. So it wasn't requirement of the XML format, it was requirement of AX application integration framework, that application integration framework could read it. But in this case, you don't need it. It will, if I'm not mistaken, it will serialize the objects. Either it will be the order of variables in alphabetic order already, either it will be depends on what approach you use to create a JSON string. I mean, depends on the library that you will use. So as you see, instead of doing bench of castings, you just need simple to call the string. And the case with data struggle, what I couldn't do when I received some feedback from the REST service, it was a JSON string, and I had to deserialize this string back to the list of data construct objects. And the issue was that, again, on the .NET, we don't know, I mean, we know definitely what's the element of the list, and on AX we don't. So I was struggling with case how we can get back the list of data constructs with unfixed type back from JSON. And again, in this case, you can do it within one line of the code. You just simply need to mention the type of structure that you want to get from the JSON string. You need to pass JSON string, the type of the element, and if the type is class, then the last optional parameter, the type of the class that you want to get back from the string. And just want to run the job, just to show that it does work. I didn't lie. So each of the list and array has the 3 elements of the data construct.
Can you repeat this? We have a form JSON serializer class in standard AX.
In IT, I can find it. It's a part of application.
Yeah, this class use
Newton Soft, yeah.
Newton Soft libraries. And do we need to get this library via NuGet package manager?
No. It's if you want to consume this library for your own application, that you need to upload it and to attach the references to your project. But Microsoft already did it in their solution, and the references to Newton DLLs they already placed to Xcore, so you don't need to take care about it. That's why it's even better, because in case you would use TFS and you have your code which depends on some external DLL, you can struggle. If you don't have experience, you can struggle how to add this DLL to your project correctly, that then after check-in, build server will catch it and will compile your assembly using this DLL.
Additionally, Microsoft can change your soft other utility, but we should continue work without changes.
Okay, so let's check it. So as I said previously, to the DC list, we just added simply 3 instances of the data construct with different things. And I want to get JSON string from that. And it does work. So it's wasn't just one line of the code magically generated for me JSON string. Same it does with array. Definitely the same string, and the third string is demonstrating that we also, instead of serializing some complicated structures, we can just serialize just data construct on its own, and it will work as well. And then we want serialize back JSON string to the list of data constructs with specified types, and it also does work. So it's returning me the list with resource team data construct objects inside it. And we can, again, to verify that it did it correctly, we can go through in a loop and to verify that we are getting the same object. So the first object that we are getting, it has definitely the same parameters that we typed. And the second will be as well. So it does work correctly. I already checked it on some practical task. Yeah, so this is the most simple way how to work with JSON from AX and don't have any problems with castings. That's all about this part. Maybe some questions. I'm pretty sure there is nothing, but just in case. Okay, it's almost 9. I was almost quick. And the last part about form adapters, it will be a short one, I promise. Form adapters classes. What's this? First of all, we didn't have it in previous version, and this is kind of new this is ordinary X classes, but they were present on the IoT. They were not part of the X application previously. What's this? The form adapter class is generally the wrapper, some toggle cover that can allow us to simply work with some forms to emulate some user interface actions without any additional difficulties, but just calling simply the like simple methods of the form adapters. So for example, let's imagine that in a previous version you have a form, like again, sales table form or customer form, and you need to write the unit test. And on this unit test, you need from the code emulate some user action. So you need, for example, from the code emulate the action, how the user opening the form, how the user pressing the button. On this button he is marking some data source. Just to implement this test case without having a form adapter, that will be a nightmare, because it's really difficult to do, and I'm not sure that each developer will be able to handle this. But what Microsoft did specifically for testing purposes, they introduced the new concept, the new type of classes, which call form adapters. And as you can see on the slide, form adapter is it's a class that can you provide API for test classes, interact with the form, and controls the form in a simple way. So for example, if you want just simply to open the form, you don't need to, from the code, to define many lines, to call menu item, to set the args with records. I mean, to what do you pass the record to, based on what you, I mean, to define the data that you want to display on this form. You just can simply do it within one line of the code using form adapters. Just example of the form adapter. The first one will be simple, and the second one will be complicated. I will tell you how I got that complicated example later. So, for example, we have a purchase table form, and for each standard form, you already have generated the class, which will have definitely the same name as your form, as the standard form, and also form adapters postfixed in the name of this class. So you can just find it on the IoT. And important thing that if you, for example, if your form belongs to the application suite model, then the form adapter, which was generated for this particular form, will be always belong to different model, which has name same as your form belong to, but also form adapter in the end. And again, with the help of form adapters, you can emulate some user-specific actions. And for example, this is just a simple example how we can use form adapter to repeat the test case that user could take on the user interface. So we just opening the form, setting the value for one of the fields, saving this value and closing it. And this is really like simple example, but for those of you who did watch previous Smart Talks, not previous, we did it maybe 1 year or half a year ago. It was related to the testing tools in Dynamics 365. You know that in AX Client you have such a thing with the name Task Recorder. In Task Recorder, you can run it when you are on the AX Client, record your user actions, and based on it, this recorder will generate for you like big XML. This XML you can import to the Visual Studio, and based on this XML, Visual Studio and Dynamics X plugin can generate for you the X++ code that will cover from the code all the action that user took on the X client. So I prepared for you such example just to save our time, because it's already 9. I will not show you how to generate the task recorder. It was described in sys-test session, but this is the after generated class test case that was generated from the task recorder data. So it also will use the form adapters, and as you can see, it's quite difficult. So what was this process? From the X client, when I activated the task recorder, I just simply opened the purchase table form, define some, create a new purchase order, define the customer data, copy the purchase order from the previous orders, and some more. And based on this recording, Visual Studio generate for me after generated code, which using form adapters inside, but it's fully emulating the action that I took on the client. So in such a way, you can create the test cases and to cover some of your functionality within the unit testing, even without writing the code. Even I think consultant can do it. He can record the steps he took they took on the client, and then import it to the Visual Studio and get auto-generated test case. And for that reason, you need the form adapters. And why I want to show this demo about form adapters, because if you want to cover the standard functionality, some standard forms with the auto-generated test cases, it's okay. The form adapters, they're already created. But what if you would create new form, and you will want to cover your new form, your new functionality with auto-generated unit test? Then you will need somehow to understand how you can generate the form adapter class to cover your form. And I just will right now show you how we can do it. At the first point, you will need, if you have already a model, for example, SmartTalks 106, in that you are doing your main development, you need to create a corresponding model for your model that will hold the form adapters classes. For that, again, you can simply use the steps to create the model from Visual Studio, but after that you need to do one trick. You need to close the Visual Studio, go to the file system, find your newly created model, the one that I created previously, SmartTalks 106 form adapter, open it and add to the descriptor file of the model. This is the file that will define all the model properties and some more the string, the information that this model will be the form adapter source model for your main model. And after that, when you are doing your new form in your main model, on the project where you placed the model, you need to set property generate form adapters to true. And when you will do rebuild, system will analyze that you have a new form that you just created, and it will check that for now there is no form adapter, and it will generate the form adapter for your newly created form fully automatically. And then if you will try again after rebuild to check the structure of the classes that you have on IoT, you can see that system generates the form adapter class automatically, and it put to your new model, which is the source model for your main model. And after you took the step, you can again go to IX client, switch on the task recorder, record the steps you want to take, and also create the auto-generated test case based on this data. And you won't have problems with that. I think that's all. Maybe you have questions about this part. Okay, so on the next slide you can see the list of links that can be useful for you. I would highlight two from them. This is the first one. This is the Microsoft blog, which describing the blog on the Microsoft MSDN website that describing the concept of form adapters, why do we need them, and why Microsoft introduced them. And also I would highlight the last link. This is the blog of one of the developers who described the concept about consuming no public variables and methods on extensions. And in this blog you can also see the example how we can consume the non-public method, because I just showed you the example of variables. That's all. Thank you for your attention.